So you might be wondering why I am doing a separate episode on applied ethics when I already have one on, ethical theories. What exactly is applied ethics? It's putting ethics into practice, analyzing real life cases, and finding answers about what is right or permissible or wrong to do in a given situation. It's, as the name suggests, it's application of ethics, which raises a question: if we have the correct ethical theory, then isn't applied ethics nothing more than consistently applying the correct theory to these cases? And the reason I have this separate episode is that I actually want to argue against that approach to applied ethics, right? There are several reasons, I think, to reject the process of just putting theory to practice in this direct way. And that theory, in some ways, I think should take a back seat when doing applied ethics, right? This might not be the opinion of all ethicists, but this is at least my opinion. And I want to kind of at least unpack why that is, right? First, there is no agreement on what the right ethical theory is, at least not in the public space, right? Um, I don't even know if I don't think there's a consensus among ethicists, right? So the dependence on the acceptance of a theory means that the application hangs on accepting the theory itself, right? And if you don't have consensus on the theory, then appealing to theory is just not going to be convincing for the majority of the people, right? The truth is that none of these ethical theories hold the crown to the truth, right? Philosophers, the public, there's disagreements about which theory is the correct one. If we can't come to an agreement on it, it's not going to be helpful to try to appeal to a particular ethical theory, because then, your entire argument honestly is its foundation is built on the theory being true, which again, if you reject, then everything else you have to say just comes crumbling down. Okay. So I think this is just, as a pragmatic reason, not a good way to go in terms of doing applied ethics, especially if your goal is to try to provide meaningful input for, people generally to do, regardless of whatever theoretical commitments they have. Okay. Two, if the goal is to engage in public discourse, which applied ethics usually is trying to do, since the problems are real life problems, right? Like real life cases that people are seeking guidance on, right? Then I don't think the theory discussion helps public discourse, right? Partly because you need then people to now explore and understand a bunch of theory stuff in order to in order to make sense of whatever it is that you're trying to do in that particular case, right? It's like a construction worker trying to build a house, wondering whether to use one material or another. And the manager, who's guiding the construction worker is trying to explain to the construction worker like some principle in chemical engineering to try to figure out which material to use. Like, it's not going to be helpful because in essence, it's a wrong tool for what it is you're trying to accomplish, right? In the public space, a lot of times applied ethics is being done so that a company or an individual or a policymaker is trying to make the most ethical decision in front of them. And if you have to now do some background learning in order to make a decision about it, it is not going to be like, it's like you're using the wrong tool. The tool that makes a lot more sense to use would just be to go directly to some core principles that may or may not align with a theory, but some core principles that everybody in the public seems to be able to understand, right? Things like it's generally not good to, cause unnecessary harm, right? Like that seems to be a pretty common sense sort of approach to doing ethics. Okay. Number three. The best reason, though, I think there is to veer away from a theory dependent approach is that the truth is that we can actually do applied ethics without a complete and consistent theory. And we can do it in a way that is far more effective and far more enlightening. Okay. The reality is that people tend to already share some core principles, the exception being like absolute sociopaths, but we generally care about the same things, right? Treat others as fellow humans, not as objects. Care for others insofar as you can. Be kind as much as possible. And don't be mean unless there's a good reason to, maybe. I don't know, maybe you make some exceptions. Don't cause unnecessary, unwarranted harm. Take responsibility for your decisions. I mean, these are just like general guiding principles that I think most people would agree. Oh, yeah, these are good moral principles to kind of live by. Okay. This matters because we are then starting more or less from a similar place, right? Theory is something that you need to study and learn, right? Like, that's not what people do on a day-to-day basis. What people do on a day-to-day basis is start off with these, more or less fairly shared principles about how to live your life. Okay. Now, there'll be some disagreement about how to value each one of these against each other, which one should take precedence over others, which one matters more, yada, yada, right? Well, in life, we can't always get everything we want, but we can at least hope to start from a place of more or less, or preferably more, agreement. And this will be critical for any kind of progress you want to make in an argument, right? You need to start from common grounds and build from there if you want to create an argument that's going to be convincing for somebody else. When you let go of theory and start with these more basic moral principles that everyone can agree to, you are much more likely to engage in meaningful discourse that will come to some sort of resolution. You'll be more likely to come to some sort of consensus, right? You can argue that there might be some inconsistencies that theory dependent approaches don't face, right? So theory tends to be maybe a little bit more consistent, which might be true, but I think that misses a key difference between the nature of applied and theoretical ethics, right? Theoretical ethicists are like abstract physicists arguing about the true nature of the universe, and applied ethicists are more like the construction workers building the bridge that millions of people are going to cross, right? At some point, you just need to get that thing done. You need to build something, you need to build it that needs to be good enough, right? It might not be perfect. It might not be the ideal bridge, let's say you're building, but it'll be good enough to serve the purpose it's going to serve. And applied ethics, in some sense, is just like that. Application doesn't need perfect accuracy, doesn't need perfect consistency. Application is often muddy, tricky, confusing. We might not have all the information to make the right decision. A lot of times we don't, right? But we still have to make a decision, right? You still have to decide on a policy, right? No policy is a kind of policy, right? So we need to make a decision at some point. We could argue all we want, but at some point, certain things just need to get done, right? So given the difference in aims, right, for applied ethics, right, we need a different tool. And I think the tool that best fits for resolving real life conflict is not theory, but rather it's going to be a hodgepodge of some core sets of moral beliefs that I think more or less everybody can at least agree to. Maybe to varying degrees, but still agree to. Okay. Does that mean we should abandon theory altogether? No, right? Theory pushes us to ask deeper questions about what makes something right or wrong, and more importantly, pushes us to maintain consistency, as I've mentioned, in the ways that we form moral judgments and the judgments and how it's applied in our day-to-day lives. I think it's important to always be considering theory and to push for that level of kind of consistency and structure. And as I've said, right, humans are creatures that love to justify their own beliefs in the moment that they hold it. So, this is one of those, ways in which we could combat that. However, I do think that it might not necessarily be the best tool when doing applied ethics. And especially when we get to, unpacking real life cases and the nuances and the range of consideration, I think we're going to be better served in what it is that we're trying to do with, the application, that we kind of step away from the theory and kind of start from a much more commonsensical starting point of core moral principles that everybody seems to more or less value. Okay. I'll leave you with this thought. I have coached the Ethics Bowl for many years. If you're not familiar with the Ethics Bowl, this is an intercollegiate competition in which groups of students from different colleges kind of come together and they argue some ethical stance on a real life case, right? So it's applied ethics being done in a competitive format, although it's not really meant to be competitive. More meant to be like collective and building each other up, right? In any case, judges score the students based on the quality of the arguments and the responses to the critiques. There's also a high school level version of the Ethics Bowl, which I got to participate in as a judge or a moderator in my time at Villanova. And there's something that you notice quickly when you've been a part of these competitions at both the high school and the collegiate level. Right? High school students tended to provide theory-based arguments, a very top-down approach from theory to application. Some of these continue in the collegiate level, but you see less of it. And I don't think it's an accident. When I coached my own teams, this was at UC Santa Barbara, at Villanova, and at Pasadena City College, I always stressed the importance of not being overly dependent on an ethical theory when arguing these cases. And the reasons were exactly the ones I laid out in this episode, right? But I share this story to make a broader claim about moral development in people. And I'm specifically thinking about you as you think about your own kind of growth in terms of the way that you make moral judgments. When we're young, we're given rules to follow, like don't steal, don't hurt people unnecessarily, right? Maybe only for self-defense. We do not know why these rules are there, nor do we even think to question them. We follow them because they are the rules that society or the school or whatever else authority laid out as a system of punishment and reward. You know, you're going to be benefiting or be harmed by following these rules or not, right? As we grow, we find out that the rules serve a purpose and that we shouldn't steal not because it's against the rules, but rather because of some other reason, right? Like it causes instability. You can't trust other people if they lie regularly. It hurts others to lie, right? I don't know. You learn all kinds of stuff, like when you steal, like it takes something away from somebody, and yada. Like there's some justification that's been given, right? Maybe we take a philosophy course and learn some ethical theories that give us some additional justifications for following the rules, right? Like utilitarianism has a whole explanation of why rules are beneficial in the long run, create a better outcome in the long run. Kant's, principles fundamentally are kind of like rule based. The key is that at some point we realize that the rules are not what's important. It's actually the underlying moral principles. And the rules are just trying to capture something like a rule of thumb, right? It's trying to guide you in a certain direction, but the rules are imperfect. They're just rules, right? But moral development doesn't stop at the rules, right? We gain clarity on the justification for what is right to do, right? And at some point, we don't seem to need a clear justification to do what is right. The fact that it's right to do is enough to do the right thing. It's not that we're not cognizant of the wrongness of causing harm or treating others as an object instead of as a rational person. We are aware, but we don't seem to rely on these justifications for doing what is right. We just acknowledge what is right to do, and do it, since justification has now kind of become a part of who you are and the way that you reason about it. In some ways, I'm being very Aristotelian about this, right? We become, ideally, if you develop all the way to becoming this, right? You become a virtuous person who does the right thing for the right reason at the right time in the right way, and you do it wholeheartedly. You just do it because it's kind of who you are. I understand that wholeheartedly as someone who does not strain to do the right thing, like who doesn't need some motivating justification to do the right thing. All right? You don't, in essence, you don't need a theory to tell you what is right to do. You pick up on whatever it is that you need to pick up on in order to realize that something is the right thing to do. Okay? At the end of the day, ethics is our attempt as a humanity to better understand how to live a good life. Nothing more. by making good choices and by having a positive impact in our communities. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, you are in fact engaging in applied ethics in your daily life when you are trying to figure out what you do with your time, money, heart, influence, so on, right? A study in applied ethics is nothing more than an attempt to just slow down, reflect on what it is that we're thinking, feeling, what values are guiding us, what decisions we're considering, and just talking it out on how we can do it better. And if that doesn't matter to you, well, let me know where you live so I can call the cops because I'm going to assume you're a sociopath. But the point is this, right? Like, at the end of the day, what it is I think that all of us are wanting from applied ethics is real life guidance on living a better life. And I can't think of a better way of doing that than to employ every tool in our tool belt to make such an important decision. And so that's why I wanted to talk about applied ethics separately, because if you chain yourself to a theory, in some sense, you're not allowing yourself to use all the tools available. And I hope that in using all the tools that you can use um, in applied ethics, that I hope that that means that we end up just becoming better decision makers. And that ideally we become like this virtuous person that just knows and is motivated and wants to and has a clear sense of the right thing to do for the right reasons, with the right feelings at the right time, in the right way.